On November 16th, 1966, the Point Pleasant Register newspaper would publish a story detailing an encounter with a being who would find themselves as the topic of legend and folklore for decades to come. And since the initial sightings, there have been numerous forms of art and media retelling the stories and embellishing the events for publicity's sake. Therefore, it would only be logical to assume that there would be an assortment of video games that would include or even revolve around this legend. But that isn't the case whatsoever. Beyond a few Easter eggs and rare encounters, as far as I could tell, not a single title is dedicated to this tale. On July 14th, 2022, a title which utilizes the legends of Point Pleasant, West Virginia, would release. Mothmen 1966, developed by LCB Games Studio and published by Chorus Worldwide Games. The first game to truly utilize Point Pleasant's Mothman legends, and in a pulp fiction format no less. But before we move on, what exactly is pulp fiction? The name is quite literal. Pulp fiction refers to the magazines that were made with cheap wood pulp paper, which were commonplace between the 1940s and 60s. These magazines typically contained fast-paced, action-based stories revolving around sensational subject matter for the time. Despite the strong foundations that many of these stories had, they were not necessarily written with quality in mind. The main mantra behind pulp fiction was quantity over quality. For Mothmen 1966, such a motto does not hold true here. It's worth noting that, due to the nature of these stories, the experiences pulp fiction offer are generally one of a kind. In the case of Mothmen 1966, calling the experience unique is a colossal understatement when considering the interesting contents. We'll be taking a deeper look into each of these shortly, but I won't spoil any of the absurdity just yet. Speaking of which, spoilers are to be expected from this point forward. The story is incredibly linear, so there's no deviation in course. As it is customary at this point, if you have the intentions to blindly play through the title we are looking at today, leave. As for the rest of you, grab yourself refreshments and let's begin this overview of this increasingly bizarre story. Holt stands behind the counter with his cards. He's out of moves, and has come to a crossroad. Black or red. Make the wrong choice, and face the consequences of failure. Nearly all of the cards on the table have been sent to the discard pile. The stakes are high, and there's a lot to ponder. He places his bet on red, but refuses to flip the card in fear of failing once more. He tries to distract himself from the possibility of failure by performing menial tasks around his gas station. Daydreaming, Holt recalls memories of his paraplegic grandmother, Elsie, who made frequent attempts at beating this modified version of solitaire. Following a series of memories, a bell disrupts the man's trance and brings Holt back to the present. Holt pokes outside to yell at the kids who bike along, making the assumption that they may have been the ones who broke into his garage. Part of him believes the outburst to be justified, while the rest of him feels a sort of shame. But the sanctity of Holt's project, a functioning replica of a Civil War-era machine gun, takes precedent over the opinion of a few kids. Eventually, Holt goes back inside. Following some more menial tasks, we're disrupted by 3 men in black, who somehow managed to enter the building without opening the door or tripping the bell with a Cadillac. They stare at Holt, without so much as a crack in their demeanor. One of the men asks Holt about his time spent at the Moose, a bar in town, where Holt had bought a woman a drink and told her about a dream he had had a few weeks ago. A dream about his grandmother roaming the forest, her crippled legs functioning normally. Elsie, Holt's grandmother, carried a Civil War-era rifle, firing off shots into the trees until a winged figure appeared in the window and screeched. Stumbling back and cracking his head on a bedpost, Holt fell unconscious and awoke sometime later. Following this incident, he convinced himself it was nothing more than a dream, but he could not explain the stitches that appeared at the base of his skull the following morning. After some brief clarifications and ground rules set by the men in black, one of the men take the card off the top of the deck, the same card Holt has been dreading. To Holt's dismay, the man takes a bite out of the card and tosses it behind the counter. Scrambling to see the result, Holt drops to grab it, but when he comes back to his feet, the men and the Cadillac have gone without a trace. No sounds made, despite the bell hose remaining functional, no items disrupted, nothing to account for this mysterious visit aside from Holt's own words and the chunk bitten out of the Jack of Diamonds in his hand. Holt's bet on red returns fruitful, and the game continues. Following the prologue, our perspective shifts to two history buffs, Victoria and Lee. A couple. They've left the town behind them, escaping the rampant light pollution of streetlights and traffic. Ahead of them, down the forest-enclosed highway, is Holt's gas station, the location of their date under the celestial theater where the Leonid meteor shower will perform for tonight's events. But despite this touching date being well thought out, there's an underlying degree of tension between the couple, the source of which will later be revealed. For now, know that in spite of their disagreements, Lee and Victoria will cooperate and show compassion for one another. And this remains true during a brief interruption further down the highway. Once resolved, the couple carry on toward Holt's gas station, the moon shining bright in the night sky. 20 minutes later, they arrive at the gas station. Lee goes to greet Holt, while Victoria stays in the car, recollecting past interactions between her and Lee. With her frustrations bound and gagged for the time being, understands where these sudden disputes come from. A piece of overdramatic wisdom, told by Lee's father, and shared over a drunken night under the stars between Lee and Victoria. His father had wished he had been born ugly, stating, "I always got what I wanted just by smiling. Ugly people have to develop other muscles. Unfortunately, those other muscles are the ones that last." Although this may seem like an inconsequential detail to bring up on its own, Victoria can't help but wonder if this was the night she got pregnant. This too may appear to be an unimportant detail. However, we'll see how this plays out by the end. One brief introduction later, Lee and Holt carry a box back to the station, and from the shadows comes a man, who stops under a street lamp and asks one simple, albeit bizarre, question. Have you seen any winged creatures flying over the area yet? Understandably confused, Victoria asks for a name. Lou Hill, writer. Lou is here to investigate claims made by a dozen reports where witnesses claim to have seen human-sized winged creatures roaming the area. Lou appears to be somewhat jovial beneath his calculated and inquisitive nature, so much so that he offers Victoria his binoculars and points her in the direction of one of these supposed creatures. Shocked by what she sees, Lou asks her to draw what she believed to have spotted. While Lou examines the sketch, Lee returns and motions Victoria away from the writer and to follow him instead. The table is ready, with an added canine companion to guard them. Holt has known Lou for quite some time, having met him at the Moose a few months back. Lou was looking for information regarding strange lights in the sky, hoping that the locals might let something slip. But for a time, he had been treated like an outsider to an exclusive cult. Nobody would speak to him, let alone pay him any mind. Before using the restroom, Holt had gone to Lou, noticing his difficulties, and suggested that he should buy a drink for those he wished to speak with. When Holt came back, Lou had already gotten two of the locals to speak with him at vast lengths. Lou Hill kindly smiled and raised a glass to Holt during that same night. A companionship brewed from then on. And with the mutual trust and understanding that comes with even an uneasy friendship, Holt knows to expect questions from Lou. Questions about the men in black that Holt had encountered a week ago. Evidently, Holt did not heed their warnings of disclosing information of their visit. In response to Holt's answer, Lou shuts his eyes and thinks before his focus is moved to the card game that Holt has before him. The impossible solitaire. The same solitaire that Holt's grandmother had taught him long ago. Now, as a quick aside, if you do consider picking up a copy of Mothmen 1966, which I highly encourage that you do so, it's a fantastic game, the minigame is reason enough to experience it. As far as I'm concerned, the Impossible Solitaire is as fun as Cult of the Lamb's Knucklebones dice game. Anyway, back to the story. Leaving the counter and cards behind, Holt and Lou go to the garage, while the dog Trent barks outside at an unseen source in the woods. Our perspective comes back to that of Victoria and Lee. Doused in moonlight, the scene is rather picturesque. Victoria, disinterested in Lee's plans for the end of the semester, internally critiques the relationship between her and Lee. How it almost feels like giving up by settling down with someone, despite feeling unsatisfied with herself, given her situation. Trent begins barking again, proving to be an effective distraction for Lee's psyche. But Lee takes notice of Victoria's disinterest and snaps once again. Fed up with her, Lee finally breaks and demands to know what is troubling her so much, that she can't even give him a minute of her attention. But Lee is oblivious to what has caught Victoria's eyes. A pair of large red eyes staring back at her, and without so much as a moment passed, a screech rattles out, and the creature incapacitates Trent, silencing the barking. Turning to Holt and Lou, the two of them look over the replica in the garage. The Winnin steam-powered machine gun. A steam engine would provide power to a rotary wheel, which spun ball-shaped ammunition inside of a closed chamber, allowing the projectiles to reach high speeds, before releasing them through a heavily shielded barrel. Before Holt is able to speak of his most recent antique acquisition, the duo hear a series of screams. Grabbing his gun, Holt rushes outside, with Lou close behind. Trent, still alive, but barely, is held off the ground by the red-eyed creature perched on the street lamp. Without a clean shot, Holt rushes to save his dog. His efforts are not enough, and Trent is carried away into the woods. Not far, mind you, as Trent is dropped by the monster and left to fall through the canopy. Lou, having mapped the area quite thoroughly, confirms the likely whereabouts of Trent and leads the way for an anger-fueled Holt with Lee and Victoria at his side. But like any adventuring party, someone has to throw a temper tantrum because they aren't in the limelight. Lee possesses this irritating trait and, as we will soon see, encounters his own issues along the way. But for now, Lou has led the party to Trent with incredible accuracy, but it appears they were too late. However, Trent was not the only loss. Lee has wandered off into the woods on his own. We come back to Lee, who has found himself drowned in jealousy. Why would Victoria listen to Lou over Lee? What had Lee done wrong? Questions that have one overarching answer. Get over yourself. His fury leaves him ignorant to the three figures watching him from the bushes, clad in dark suits and blank expressions. The men in black observe Lee, their intent known only by themselves. Despite his ignorance, the sensation of being watched is impossible to shake. He hurries through the forest and into a clearing. In this open area, a noise begins to play in the distance. A river, perhaps? But according to Lee's map, he doesn't recall seeing a river anywhere nearby. As he draws closer to the source, The ambiguity remains constant, with a numbing peace present. A sort of calm Lee hasn't felt for quite some time, if ever before. Before becoming too comfortable, a painfully bright light washes over the ground, with a deafening drone accompanying it. The preceding events are... well, I'll let you see for yourself. Continuing the search for Lee, Lou, Holt, and Victoria wander the woods, speaking loosely of their concerns and pasts. Suddenly, Holt hears rustling in the bush. Aimed and ready, he awaits the monstrosity's approach. But no such thing occurs. At least, no beast, that is. Instead, walking on her supposedly crippled legs, Holt's grandmother, Elsie, and in her hands, a musket. An image pulled straight from Holt's supposed dreams. The grizzled, war-torn appearance only lasts for a moment before she collapses to the ground, passing out soon after. What with facing the trauma of losing his dog and encountering his grandmother in what should be an impossible situation, Holt takes the time to bury his dog before pressing on, putting part of himself at ease in doing so. They continue the journey back to Holt's gas station, hoping to happen upon Lee in the process. The trio approach the station from the side of the road, concealed by the shrubbery. Atop the building sits numerous moth-like creatures attracted to the light. Holt makes a dash for the building, his grandmother in his arms, but unsurprisingly, he is attacked and drops to the pavement. Lou and Victoria take this moment to assess the situation and formulate a plan. The musket Lou carries has 3 rounds available. A puzzle presents itself. Shoot out the lights in a sequence that would disturb the looming threat and provide an opening to save Holt and Elsie. Now inside of the gas station, the trio take a moment to collect themselves and peer out the window. Lou checks his watch and remarks at the Leonid's growing intensity. They've nearly reached their peak. Before anything else can be said, the creatures shriek and take off into the sky, spiraling about like an elaborate ballet with the backdrop of a celestial light show. Witnessing this, Victoria thinks of her past college experience with psychedelics and how she sought to expand her perception of reality. But this display of otherworldly intrigue dwarfs anything she had experienced prior. She's never told Lee about these events, unsure of how he might respond. However, given Lee's encounter, perhaps what he should expect is remarkably familiar. Following the mesmerizing show put on by the Mothmen, numerous bipedal creatures emerge from the woods. Hogs, moose, wildcats, deer, and many other creatures unnaturally pace the road. The trio watch on in silent concern. Lou surmises that the Mothmen and Leonids are related in some way, and by proxy, or perhaps by sheer chance, these other bipedal animals are here because of the Leonids and the Mothmen. In his studies, Lou had come across notes detailing a diary belonging to a Jesuit missionary from 1693. In this book were sketches of what many believe to have been Thunderbirds, some of the most powerful spiritual beings from Ojibwe beliefs. But in comparison to Lou's collected drawings of Mothmen, he believes that the sketches in the missionary's journal to also be Mothmen, as opposed to the aforementioned spirits. With each sketch in the journal, Lines were drawn around the Mothmen, seemingly as a means of denoting their incredible speed. But Lou believes these were not a signature of speed, but of the Leonids, the exact same situation they have found themselves in now. Holt goes to soothe his tired grandmother, but as she dozes off, a man emerges from the dark. Lee, exhausted and incoherent. Through sheer will, he talks of his encounter with the unknown light and of the prying eyes of the watchmen unseen. Following Lee's concluding sobs, Lou speaks up once more, claiming to have the answer to what is going on here. To paraphrase, the Leonids occur every 33 years. Of each event, only the least intense have records. A century ago, in 1866, they had supposedly grown to a great intensity, similar to what we are experiencing here. Why the 100-year gap exactly instead of 99? Potentially due to the periodic adjustments that we have been forced to make with our calendar since that time. Though that is merely speculation. Referencing medieval manuscripts, Lou makes mention of bipedal warrior rabbits that are typically used to decorate parchment. It is Lou's belief that the Leonids are responsible for the creation of these bipeds seen throughout history, leveraging the idea that these rabbits hadn't come from imagination alone. To follow his mad theory, he claims that humans had come to be just like the other bipeds. The only difference being that we had survived, and either stomped out the rest of the competition whenever they rose with their new anatomy, or pushed the small remainder into obscurity and myth. Outlandish? Absolutely. However, it is soon verified by Elsie rising to her feet once more and barking words with a new voice. A soldier's voice. Elsie's grandfather has possessed her in order to, quote, finish the mission. Her grandfather had originally planned to use the Winnin's steam machine gun against the coming bipeds. But this hadn't been a successful endeavor. His legs had been riddled with bullets by the very same weapon. Similar to how Elsie's legs have been riddled with an abnormal amount of moles. Holt, confused and struck with panic over the potential secret influence of his obsession, tries not to think about the circumstances too hard. The group moves to the garage, preparing for the finale of this nightmare. Lou, Victoria, and Lee hide inside of the gas station while the battle rages on outside. In the heat of the moment, Lee admits his fear, his cowardice, his desire to earn his red badge of courage, a war wound to signify his worth. But considering the unlikely odds, this is foolish. Both Victoria and Lou discourage Lee from pursuing something so utterly pointless. Victoria informs Lee, at long last, of his future in fatherhood, and Lou gives some backstory on the book, Red Badge of Courage, and its author, Stephen Crane, who had never set foot on a battlefield to begin with. Lee's desire for valor subsides. Following this touching scene, from the main entrance, a possessed Elsie barges in, shouting for the participation in the battle outside. A struggle for the rifle ensues, eventually wounding Elsie. There's no time to lose. The trio make haste. Sprinting from the gas station, Holt rattles off countless rounds, tearing apart creatures with ease. At the end of the chaotic property, Lee's car sits unscathed, but a handful of creatures are in pursuit. With esoteric accuracy, Lee calls for Victoria to dodge incoming assaults before they even begin. The trio clamber into the vehicle and take off. Following some discussion of the hell they left behind, Lee slams on the brakes and exits the vehicle. He returns with a baby biped goat, telling Victoria that it's hurt. They take it with them and continue home, but not without another bit of trivia from Lou. The Greek god Pan and Satan were depicted as bipedal goats, and throughout history there have allegedly been accounts of gruesome wars between goatmen and humanity. Thus concludes the main story. Following the credits, we see that Lee and Victoria have their own place now. Lee washes his car with his daughter nearby, and inside, Victoria goes to check on her goat man son. All the while, the three men in black observe from a distance, their intentions, once again, known only to them. Mothmen 1966 is definitely one of the stranger titles I've written about thus far. Not quite as bizarre as Critters for Sale, but it comes in comfortably at second place. Initially, I had thought this would be a quick and easy essay to write. Exotic weapons from the Civil War, cryptids, secret societies that I hadn't even touched on, possession, aliens, men in black, and other weird happenings made for an absorbing experience. Mothmen 1966 is without a doubt one of the most fascinating games I've played this year. Initially believing it to be nothing more than a rendition of the classic Mothman sightings in Point Pleasant, I can say with confidence that this game has surpassed every expectation I had. Contorting source material and incorporating ideas into a plot that is digestible in one sitting is, without a doubt, a difficult task to accomplish. Couple that with the exceptional artwork, both in the game and soon to come as potential merchandise in 2023, I am thoroughly excited to indulge in future works from LCB Games. Anyway, enough gushing. I hope that this more story-orientated writing style or perspective, however you want to see it, was enjoyable. I intend to put up some more research-orientated projects soon. Anyway, thank you for your time and support, no matter how brief. Have a pleasant day.